Have you heard of Clavicular?
Yes, I have. In fact, I used to do that. I used to hit myself. Can you see my jawline?
I am so curious what you think of the Looksmaxxing movement.
This was traditionally something that would, for women, right? Obsession over their look and plastic surgery. It was never something that men were ever supposed to dabble in. That reeked of femininity. But now it's considered more manly.
It's trying to fulfill a greater purpose because people have lost meaning in their life.
You might think as an influencer with so many followers that you're in control of the game, but actually your audience is in control of the game.
I feel no control of the game. Play chess monkey. We experienced that for years.
And what was the kind of toxic man that you were falling for?
Showering you in love, make you feel very wanted, and then disappear.
Andrea had so many boys interested in her, and the only ones she'd be interested in were the ones who didn't want her back.
I don't know if you had a parent, a mother or father, who was a little bit distant or a little bit cold. Is that possible?
Our dad, he would put both of our chess rating on a graph at the different ages just to keep us competing.
I always felt like I was never impressing him with my chess results.
Today, we're joined by legendary author Robert Greene. You might know him from 48 Laws of Power or The Art of Seduction or one of your other best-selling 7 books. Today, we're going to sit with him and talk about some of the classics like Seduction and Power, but also what he's currently working on, the Sublime, connecting to something bigger than yourself. Robert, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Alexandra. My pleasure. Happy to be here.
And Robert just asked, why did you want me on your show?
Yeah.
And first, I like to share my story, how I first got introduced to your books. And I will say that I argued with your assistant a few times why I couldn't start reading The Art of the Sublime, but hopefully soon I can get that copy. But my introduction...
What were you arguing about?
I kept asking, why can't I just get a copy? I want to read. I know it's not out yet. I know you've been working on it for 6 years.
And he said he couldn't do that?
Yeah.
Well,
Did
he doesn't have a copy of it.
But we listened to the podcast where you're talking about it instead.
We've been collecting tidbits, but I'm waiting
I'll get you an advanced copy.
Yes.
I would love that.
The galleys,
I would love that.
In like a couple months, the uncorrected proofs.
That's exactly what I ever wanted.
We'll add some random notes in there.
Why are you interested in it?
So to set the landscape, I was 20. We just moved to LA, living with my big sister. And I noticed something that everyone can probably relate to. All the types of men that I was attracted to had one pattern. They were all a little bit toxic. And then I listened to your book, The Art of Seduction, and I noticed, everyone does that hot and cold. And I guess I have a type. And I was really grateful for your book. I re-listened to a couple times, and I'll say it took me a couple years to learn my lesson, but it genuinely helped me find a better partner. So I just wanted to thank you from my love life. And then from there, we got into his other books, but that was the start.
Well, I want to dive a little deeper into this. So I'm going to be interviewing you for a moment, please. So what was the pattern? What was the kind of toxic man you were falling for? Because it was something about you that was attracted to these types.
Well, it was, here we go.
Sorry,
and let me say,
great.
now I've got the best boyfriend. We got 1 year.
Oh, I love
Finally
him.
found a good man, but the first couple years were really rough.
Okay.
It would always be the ones who would be super showering you in love, make you feel very wanted, and then disappear, and then ghost you for a week. But then they say, oh no, that's not true. I did really want to see you. I just forgot to message you all week when I was in town. And I think it was always the hard to get ones that I could never get my fingers on that I wanted the most. And in retrospect, knowing they're always the worst.
As the sister, Andrea had so many boys interested in her, and the only ones she'd be interested in were the ones who didn't want her back.
Yeah.
What do you think that says about her?
Well, it's very, very common dynamic. There's a little bit of self-esteem involved. If somebody really, really wants you, a man like that, it seems like maybe he's a bit of a loser. Maybe he has no strength. He has no will. He's just kind of a dish rag. Whereas the man who seems kind of interested, but then goes hot and cold, it kind of becomes like an interesting game for you. You want to maybe sort of be the one that can kind of rope him in, kind of thing. But it's the coquette that we're talking about. That's the type of seducer. I know I'm very attracted to coquettes. It's been the story, and a lot of misery involved. The thing is, it kind of traces to your childhood, to your early childhood. I don't know if you had a parent, a mother or father who was a little bit distant or a little bit cold? Is that possible?
It wasn't cold, but I always felt like I was never impressing him with my chess results. So it was more.
Oh, your father?
Yes. We had a very competitive childhood. And so our dad always took us to tournaments. And I had some good performances, but I think specifically with chess, there was that hate-love relationship throughout the childhood. This is my therapy session now.
Yeah, our dad, he would put both of our chess rating on a graph at the different ages just to keep us competing together.
Starting at what age?
Well, 13, 12. Well, we started at 6.
Yeah, we started playing.
The graph
from a really
started
young
maybe.
age.
Actually, the graph might have been our entire life.
Wow.
It was on
he
the fridge.
plotted it all out.
Well, I mean, if somebody is too easy, then you sometimes unconsciously you think something might be wrong with them, right?
Well,
And it has to do with sort of your self-esteem. Maybe you don't feel you're worthy of somebody like that.
absolutely.
And you might be attracted to someone who's going to slightly hurt you. I know that sounds terrible.
No, I think at the beginning, it was definitely a confidence thing. You know, you just got to LA and your validation, well, my validation came from other people, which I think in a couple years, once I matured, my partner was someone who definitely showed a lot of interest from the beginning, and so did I, and that was very compatible. But I think it was more just the cycle where you're 20 and you like to play the games, and then I think you learn your lesson eventually. So I thought maybe it was more just an emotional intelligence type of thing for myself, but
That you did read them as kind of, you didn't see that they were like that? What do you mean emotional intelligence?
oh, I think it was more of a habit that I had to grow out of, that I just think it was just like a stage in growing up. That's how I would judge it. But I guess there's also probably a lot of adults who are still stuck in that cycle. So I don't know if it's necessarily a maturity thing.
And now you've learned your lesson.
I have.
Do you think these men were consciously using that strategy on you?
I definitely think those type of men were that's probably their power play. And for sure they use it on a lot of women. So I don't know if they knew subconsciously what they were doing, but I also think it's probably more common in the lay scene and in the creator scene that we were in.
Yeah.
But there's also plenty good ones. And that's why I'm glad I have my partner.
It's interesting because I always felt very opposite from that. I hate hot cold. I'm very much a realist, which I know you are also from your books, where I would assume that if somebody is being cold in any way, that just means they're not interested in me. And for some reason, if somebody shows they're slightly not interested, I lose interest for them, but maybe too much, where like I need somebody to be very obsessed with me for me to be romantically into them.
But what about a man who shows a lot of interest and then pulls back? Because that's the game, and that's what hooks you. So the man, in her case, he doesn't start off being cold. Probably he starts off kind of love bombing you,
exactly,
and then
they
he pulls
disappear.
back.
Nope, any pulling back is not okay with me. I know there's one archetype who gives you a lot of attention and makes you feel very special.
Yeah,
I need that 100% of the time.
Well, that could be the rake. That could be the man who gives you that, but then he disappears he leaves you after 3 or 4 months.
Well, let's hope not, Robert.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And you shared that you were also attracted to the coquettes in your lifeline. And obviously you have an amazing partner. I know she even helps you edit your books, I think.
Yeah, and she's a filmmaker. So
that's so cool. Obviously you found your partner, but how did you grow out of that habit, or does it ever change? Is that always kind of part of you?
Well, I don't know how deeply we want to go into this, but I had a lot of pain from some of these relationships, and I'm not. When I met her, I was still in my 30s. I was 36, 37. I didn't have my head together, so I could fall victim to a woman without really realizing it, and then it would be too late. I was kind of naive. I still am to a degree, because I'm slightly the romantic type, right? What I've learned over the years is that there has to be a kind of a deeper connection between two people. It can't just be physical. And that's not to say that I'm physically attracted to her. She's very beautiful. We had such similar interests, in literature, in arts, in politics, etc. We're like two pieces of a puzzle that fit so perfectly together. And so it was probably mostly luck. I kind of I was very attracted to her, and I knew she was a really interesting person, but she could have been toxic as well. So it was just kind of the luck of the draw kind of thing.
I relate to that. That's how very much I felt like when I found my partner.
How long have you been together?
We just passed 1 year.
1 year, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I already call him my brother-in-law.
Really?
I'm so excited. He's such a wonderful addition to the family. I'm going to keep saying that until they're actually married.
That's very nice.
Yeah.
That's a great story. So I have in my Sublime book, I have a chapter called The Love Sublime.
Oh.
And that's actually what I'm editing right now.
Yay.
And so the idea is that people today are so, I feel like a problem that a lot of younger people have, and I don't mean to preach here, but they're afraid of pain.
Mm-hmm.
They're afraid of being hurt. And so they want to be invulnerable. And so at the slightest problem in a relationship, they're just going to give up and swipe and find somebody else. And in this chapter, I'm talking about the metaphor we use is falling in love. And I like that sort of metaphor of falling. And people will kind of fall a little bit and then they'll go, oh, no, I don't want to get hurt. So on to somebody else. But this, what I'm writing in here is if you just keep falling and falling and falling and falling and falling, and you lose all that defensiveness that we all have, something, rather magical and transcendental can happen where you can anticipate others' thoughts, where you feel like the boundaries between two people are dissolving. And then that's when it becomes sublime and it reaches that kind of level.
I know that part of it is that people are afraid of falling in love, but do you think another part of it is that people just feel like they have so many more option nowadays from dating apps and social media, where it's not just that they're afraid, but that they're too scared to commit?
Well, how about afraid and too scared? What's the difference?
They're afraid to commit because they think they can find something better versus they're afraid to commit because they think it's going to hurt.
I'm wondering if unconsciously there might be the same thing going on, right? So, first of all, there's nothing wrong if you don't want to commit. I'm not judging that. That's perfectly fine. And believe me, when I was in my 20s, I was like that myself. But a lot of people, you're looking for something that's kind of deeper than just, every 3 months. That can get kind of boring after a while, and it can become very unsatisfying. So deep down, if you don't want that, if you're avoiding that, then I'm saying unconsciously you are afraid of commitment. You're not scared that there's somebody better. It's just that you're worried that you're going to be hurt if you let yourself fall like that. If you give up if you become vulnerable, then you're opening yourself to a lot of pain. Mm. And so I'm just seeing a lot of, and I'm not judging, because people of the Generation Z, or even the millennials, you've gone through incredibly difficult times that I never had to deal with, with the economy, with the pandemic. And so being a little risk averse is very understandable. But I think it comes from a level of fear more than I have all of these options. Because at some point, maybe you don't want to have like endless swiping. Maybe you do want to have some kind of commitment. You're rolling your eyes. Please argue with me.
I'm taking it in. I think the two are connected, but I so often hear girlfriends who go on dates, and when it doesn't work out, it goes back to, oh, this person is just afraid of commitment. And I have seen these people, date like 50 women and still not find a girlfriend, which kind of does suggest that they probably would have found the person by then, at least if you believe in the secretary problem. So I hear you, and I think there's some truth there, but I think it's a mix.
A mix of what?
That it's not the same thing still. That having more optionality available to you than ever before does sort of change your values and what you desire.
Yes. Yeah.
And even things like marriage that used to be valued much more highly by society before, these institutions seem to be decaying.
Yeah.
So I think it's a bigger paradigm shift than just fear.
Now, you might think you have more possibilities, but back in the day before Tinder and the whole thing, I had as many options as anybody else. I could go to a bar. I could meet people, I was pretty bold. I was a rake, right? It wasn't that difficult. It's not like I didn't have options. There are always hundreds and thousands of women out there. Okay, so maybe it's a lot easier now, and that kind of changes your psychology. But the desire is still there for something deeper, right? Underneath all of that, there's something deeper that you want. And if you're not feeling that, if you're avoiding that desire, then I think it comes from fear. It's fear of being vulnerable. Because if you're saying this paradigm shift with flipping through that, well, you're still a human being, right? And you're still afraid of something deeper happening to you. I don't know why we're disagreeing on that.
I agree that the deeper meaning is there and that people are looking for this.
I mean, look, men and women are different, so we can go there. That the appeal of the variety is going to appeal more to men because men are traditionally more promiscuous.
Right.
So there is that difference there. But a point is reached if you're a man and you've been swiping and you've had hundreds of women where you get tired of it and you want something else and you're 34, 35 years old.
Okay, I think that's part of how I'm thinking through it.
Okay.
So I've also heard this thing that men don't settle when they find the right person. They settle when they're ready and they want a wife and a family and they're ready for that next stage.
Sure.
So why does the fear suddenly change after they've dated enough people and they start wanting a family rather than, let's say, in their 20s or early 30s?
Well, you're in a different stage of life. But I'm thinking that even nowadays, that's changed a little bit, where we're not seeing as many people in long-term relationships, as many commitments, or marriage rates are falling, and so I'm still saying that there's still that fear of commitment. But even for the men who've finally decided, you want a family, you want something else, maybe you get tired of it, and maybe not for all the best reasons in the world. Maybe there's financial reasons as well. I mean, maybe it's mostly the desire for settling down. I know that's what happened to me. I got kind of bored with it, and I did want to settle down at some point. And also I found that life very chaotic. And I like kind of order. I'm a Taurus, and I like things to be kind of orderly so I can do my work. I know so having a long-term relationship is kind of helping me that, whereas in my 20s, I didn't feel that way so much.
So then would you say that you overcame...
Wow, go ahead.
I love watching you. No, please keep going.
No, you're very rational and very interesting. Go ahead.
Okay. I think it's not that I disagree with you that fear isn't a part of the equation. It's more that I think there's other factors that are also involved. Like what you're saying now, when you finally met your wife and decided to settle, maybe part of that fear had changed, but also your desires and what you wanted had changed. So that helped with deciding to pick a partner.
What were these desires?
Desires that you had maybe dated enough women in your 20s. You were ready for the next stage of your life.
Yeah.
You saw so many people and realized that was not what actually was giving meaning to your life and that a real partner would.
Yeah.
And that's the same as overcoming fear to you?
No, I mean, I'm just saying that people nowadays, because of the chaotic circumstances of the world and of their lives, and even with all of those options of swiping, it's too much. It's like overloading your brain, right? And so it gives you this sense of instability. And so it's almost easier to be doing that than to actually give the commitment, because you're opening yourself up to some kind of hurt and to some pain. And people, I think, are trying to avoid that very much. They're trying to avoid being vulnerable and being open to pain. And this is an easy excuse for them. So people often talk about the internet is changing people's brains. And I don't believe that. I think it's just simply playing into the weaknesses in human nature that are already there. And so the fear of commitment that men have probably had for ages has always been there. And this just makes it easier to kind of justify, I've got all of these different options. I don't think I checkmated you here on this, but that's all right.
I think we've at least reached a stalemate where I feel satisfied with that explanation.
For the record, I feel like you guys are very much on the same page, just talking about different sides of the same coin.
I mean, I might be missing something, and you might be right, and I could be wrong. I'm very open to that possibility. I'm not always. I don't have all the answers, even though I wrote The Art of Seduction. But I'm not in my 20s. I'm considerably more than that, older than that. So I don't really know the psychology, particularly of young men, from the inside. I'm looking at it from the outside. But I do have the ability to kind of put myself in other people's shoes. And I wasn't doing this, but as I said, I was a rake in my 20s. So I kind of understand the psychology of avoiding commitment.
So Art of Seduction was written 25 years ago. And since then, social media has flourished and people are spending more and more of their time online. I was curious if you thought the way people seduce online is differently than the way they do in person.
I'm sure it is. I mean, I don't know because I've never really done that before. But I know that early on in the beginnings with email, et cetera, in the virtual world, that there is this kind of the flirtation can be very extreme with texting and such, and so that dynamic of creating some mystery and creating a spark and kind of intriguing the other person is still psychology. So seduction is psychology, right? It's not force. You're not bullying somebody into a relationship. You have to make them kind of interested in you, right? You have to get their defenses down. You have to get them to open up to you in some way. So the tools for that are different. It's like the difference between, technology from 200 years ago for things now. But the game is the same. It's the psychology of lowering people's defenses, making them open to you, making them less resistant. So using, with the swiping, there's no seduction involved, right? It's mostly just, I guess, I don't really know what it is. So that isn't really seduction. But when it comes to seduction, that's a timeless game. I talk in The Art of Seduction about language and writing and how writing can be seductive, right? And there's a kind of way of communicating that's a little bit open-ended and insinuating ideas. You can do that in email, in texting, whatever. It's still the same game.
And let's say beyond the surface of one-on-one texting, Alex and I were having this discussion about how, and I haven't come to my conclusion about how creators modern day are in a way seducing their audience because they have to employ a lot of these strategies. Do you have any takes on that as well as a public facing, let's say, internet persona? I don't know how much you're following creators nowadays, but that they're using the same strategies as you would in The Art of Seduction.
Well, like what, for instance?
So, for example, in The Art of Seduction, you talk about how, public figures or rulers, they also have their seduction types. And nowadays, you can sometimes see that with people online. Like the siren can be people who are primarily leaning into their sexuality and their looks, and that's how they're gaining a following. Or you could have people like the ideal who are more cookie cutter. I think it's a question of, do creators seduce their audience, and if those archetypes also map onto them when they're not just seducing from one to one, but one to many?
Yes. I mean, some of the types like the charmer or the star or even the ideal lover or even the dandy, they're definitely can be used to seduce the public. They're for social seductions. The problem with like creators and influencers and the internet and all of that,
a loaded topic. Here we go. This is great. I love that one take.
It's hard to keep it going.
Yes.
Right? People tire of you, right?
Yeah.
And they want something new. And so you have an image, let's say you're the siren type and it's a woman and she's kind of projecting all of this sexual energy. It's exciting. She'll get an audience. She's getting a little bit older, somebody younger, the different look comes about. Suddenly, like a magnet, everyone goes to this other person. So I've had a few people, celebrities, people in the music business who've asked me about this game. But if social, because a lot of The Art of Seduction and the 48 Laws of Power is about absence, is about creating mystery. It's about disappearing. It's about stepping back so people know exactly who you are. And they will ask me, well, Robert, I have like 20 million followers on Instagram, and I can't step back. If I step back, people will forget me. But at the same time, they're losing interest in me. What do I do? And I tell them, well, you have to play the game. You have to step back a little bit. You have to create some mystery. You can't be so consistent where people know exactly who you are and they start getting bored with you. You have to mix things up. And I give examples of a lot of people, pop stars, etc., who know how to constantly play with their image and change it sometimes and recreate themselves and reveal other parts of their personalities, right? I'd have to go more deeply into your online presence. But I imagine for you two who are very smart, Stanford grad with a sister who can beat her in
has no
chess.
graduate degree.
Very rarely. I'm kidding.
I did tell him
that's
I'd
not
beat
what I
her
heard.
3-0.
You can be smart about this. You can be strategic and not just feel like I could just go on doing this forever, because people will end up tiring of you.
This is actually very similar to an article one of my friends wrote. He used to manage Mr. Beast, the most subscribed YouTube account
Who is
ever.
this person?
His name is Reed. He's the CEO of Night Media.
Of what?
Of Night Media. They're an
I think it's
agency.
somebody who contacted me.
Oh,
Somebody who's talked about how they, anyway, with Mr. Beast.
Reed Dusher. Oh,
I don't think that's how you pronounce it.
I pronounced his last name wrong.
Dusher?
Reed.
Well,
It's
spelled like that.
similarly.
Dusher?
I don't think it's
Oh, I'm
pronounced.
so sorry, Reed, if you're watching this. But
Doucher?
something like that. It's German.
Daucher. Daucher. But
Good
it's
thing you
Dusher
studied
here.
languages.
Forgive me if you're watching this, but he wrote a good article on this, on how some of the biggest streamers in the world or biggest creators would actually benefit from taking time away from the spotlight.
Yeah.
And he's echoing completely what you said, where everybody feels like they can't because they'll lose attention. Now you do see some examples of people like Kai Cenat was one of the most watched live streamers of all time. And he recently stepped away. He's working on something new on fashion, and he's not showing people look into what he's doing. And it's a perfect example
and
of
then
this.
people will, they may forget him a little bit, but then when he comes back, he's got like this core audience and he's up to something new. Well, what's he up to? He's intriguing. He's playing on human psychology. We're fast. If people are too in our faces, they become predictable and familiar. And secretly we grow bored with them, and secretly we feel kind of superior to them because they're predictable, right? And they're going to lose interest in you. But if you can mix it up, if you can keep it on your side, because you might think as an influencer with so many followers that you're in control of the game, but actually your audience is in control of the game.
I feel no control of the game.
Yeah. You're constantly at their mercy, right? They're thinking of you in a certain way, and you have to kind of live up to what they think about you. You need to switch it around. You need to put the power back on your side, where you're putting them on their heels. Like, I don't really know Alexandra and Andrea.
You got it.
You're crushing it.
I don't.
He asked if we're twins.
Well, you do look like twins.
No, I agree with you, Robert.
Okay.
No debating for me on that one.
In fact, I thought you were the younger one. No, I'm just kidding.
No, that's usually
I'm
how
kidding,
it
I'm
goes.
kidding.
No,
Just
I don't
kidding,
take insult. Don't worry, I'm not offended.
Okay. But you have to control your own image. That is the essence of this game. Does your audience, are they controlling your image? You're like a circus dog that must perform for them, always the same act.
Play Chess Monkey. We experienced that for years.
Chess monkey?
Yeah. As in, whenever we do something different from chess at the start, everybody would come and chat and say, play chess, play chess. So we joke that we're chess monkeys.
Oh, I see.
And on the absence thing, because I'm more curious if it's just a cause and effect. For example, in our case, you have to go through stages of reinventing yourself. We played chess for so many years, and we still love chess, and we still do these type of events when there is a good occasion, but we don't want to play chess online every day. And to kind of rediscover what other things you feel like you can put your art and your work into the world, you have to take time away, but mainly just for like brainstorm purposes, rediscovering yourself, doing a bit of soul searching. I don't know necessarily if the absence is like a required part of the formula. I see it more as just an aftermath of kind of going through the rebirth process.
Well, no, you make a really good point. I think it's pretty much the same thing. It's more like, are you smart and you're strategic, or are you just simply doing what people expect of you? Are you repeating the same thing over and over? So you don't have to necessarily step back in time, but you have to step back physically in your mind.
Yeah, I
you
agree.
have to go, what is our next move? How can we keep people intrigued? How can we keep them a little bit off balance with what we do? Okay, so they think that we're chess monkeys, that we just play chess, or we're going to throw them a curveball. Now we're going to start doing something very different. I don't know what that would be. Please don't ask me.
I techno DJ in Berlin. I think it's quite different. I play techno shows in Berlin. So that was my curveball.
Okay, there you go.
It's quite different.
Yeah. It's not necessarily like you have to disappear for a month. I understand that. Some people that does work, and I've advised some people who've asked me for help that that's what they should do. Sometimes you can't do that, but you have to step back yourself and not be so reacting to what other people are giving and not always trying to please other people. Sometimes I look at some of these people online, Instagram, and they strike me as clowns that have to get more and more desperate to keep their audience interested. They have to do things that are more and more extreme. And I don't think that feels very good inside of you. You feel kind of weak, like you're captive to your audience, you know?
That actually reminds me of one of the laws of power, which is about making sure to capture attention, similar to the gist of any press is good press.
Yeah.
What was the exact phrasing?
Court attention at all costs.
Yeah, court attention at all costs, law number 6. And this is something that maps out perfectly to social media, right? You sort of have to keep one-upping yourselves with these ideas. How do you balance courting attention at all costs with still, maintaining your reputation and not going into this clown route?
Well, the clown route, you start getting more and more desperate and people sort of feel it and then they start losing. I see that all the time. I'm very sensitive in watching this because I don't ever myself want to turn into a clown. So stepping back and mixing up your game and becoming a DJ, a techno DJ, whatever you called it in Berlin, is courting attention at a higher level. So if you're, this is what I thought that I've lost. If you're constantly hitting the same game, hitting the same buttons, doing what I call a clown route act, people will start tiring of you. You won't court as much attention, right? You have a limited audience unless you're Taylor Swift and it can be like in the billions. There's only so many people who are going to be interested in the Botez sisters, right? It's not limitless, right? So what's going to happen is they're going to start frittering away less and less and less and less and less. If you change it up, if you do something a little bit different, you can expand your audience. You can court more attention. So one of the other laws, I think it's 26, is recreate yourself. By changing up your image. And I'm not saying wildly, you don't become something completely different, but by changing up your image, you actually will court more attention, right? Having constant this one note of being a certain type of person and being very good at it, people will tire of you, right? So the icon of courting attention of all costs is P.T. Barnum, right? You know about the story about P.T. Barnum, right?
I'm not familiar.
He was this guy in the 19th century who was considered the greatest showman that ever lived. And he had a museum in New York of all these oddities, like really weird, like a half man, half woman, kind of like a freak show in a circus. But he had also these taxidermied animals that were actually he created, but they were like monsters. Just freaks and oddities in this museum, and people loved it, and they would go and see it. He was the one that coined the phrase "no publicity is bad publicity."
Right.
But he was always changing his game because he knew how quickly people got bored. He would do most extreme things, but always different and variety to get attention, right? He had this one thing, which I thought, the story I use in the book, where he had the museum in New York, and he would hire the worst group of musicians he could find to sit on the street and play their music. And it'd be so bad, people would rush into his museum just to escape it, right?
That's hilarious.
He was always thinking on that level, how can I just somehow trick people into coming in and seeing my collection, okay? And so if you're strategic, if you're wise, if you're mixing up your game, you will end up courting much more attention. But if you're always one note, people will tire of you.
So speaking of people who do these crazy stunts, I'm curious, have you heard of Clavicular?
Yes, I have.
Is that why you gave that look?
In fact, I used to do that. I used to hit myself. Can you see my jawline?
It looks like you're Looksmaxxing. This is great.
Far from it.
I am so curious what you think of the Looksmaxxing movement, because in a way it's super realistic. People are saying the more attractive you are, the better your life becomes.
He's being more vulnerable in a sense because he's being open. I don't know if that counts as vulnerability. I'm curious Robert's take.
Do you see him as someone who's kind of vulnerable? I mean,
not vulnerable, but I'd say honest. Like he, especially in his interviews, admits to everything and explains that in his case, it felt like it was just a product of society and he gets higher results the more he does this. So I think he's at least not trying to deceive people. And like in his opinion, he's sharing this because it thinks he's helping other men.
Well, it's a bit odd sociologically, since as I said, I'm a little bit older, that this was traditionally something that would, for women, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obsession over their looks.
Right.
Sure.
And plastic surgery and what can I do and how can I get bigger breasts and what can blah, blah, blah. And it was never something that men were ever supposed to dabble in. That reeked of femininity, of you're not masculine, you're not a man. But now it's considered more manly, that this is kind of being ultra masculine. To me, seems very paradoxical because it feels more kind of like a feminine obsession. Like traditionally, a man put all of his energy into his work. And if he made a lot of money, women would be attracted to him in droves. Women weren't necessarily obsessed with a man's looks, right? They were more into his intelligence, his wit, and his pocketbook, to be honest with you, right? So the strategy for a man was to maximize those things, to have a good personality and to make a lot of money. And so this seems like something has shifted in male psychology. And I know young men are now going through some radical shifts as they no longer feel like they're in the top of the food chain. Like men used to feel secure, like, I was the breadwinner. It's a level of superiority there, right? And men have always used their sense of superiority to women as a form of self-esteem. And it kind of fritters away now with women, going to Stanford and getting a PhD in international relations. And
just a PhD, but we'll take it. Thank you.
Well, women are doing better in universities than men are.
Right.
They're not necessarily making as much money because things are still unequal, but it's frittering away at male psychology. It's making men feel insecure about who they are. And so what is masculinity is going through a terrible time right now. Like, what does it mean to be masculine? Is it the kind of Andrew Tate toxic form of masculinity? What is it? And in that insecurity, in that feeling of, I don't know what it really is to be masculine, there's this kind of shift into like thinking like these sort of more feminine forms of like maximizing your looks. And obviously on things like Instagram, your appearance and your looks get you a lot of followers, get you a lot of money, make you very successful. So I can see where the logic comes from, and I can see how it kind of evolved that way. I don't know, and you'd be better able to answer this. I just don't know if that's changed how women look at men. If women are now more interested in the max looking, or if they find it kind of repulsive, something I can't tell. But back in the day, a woman would find that very repulsive, right? That a man was so obsessed with his looks.
What's your opinion on Clavicular?
Well, first, do you find it repulsive or attractive if a man is really into his looks?
Question. Well, it was interesting when you described the paradox because, and I'm looking on it on the more optimistic side, because obviously there are a lot of cons that come from this. And if it's coming out of insecurity and you're putting your health at risk and you're not prioritizing the right things, but in a different sense, women for so long have had to focus on their looks and do all these surgeries. And like the pressure's always been there to not only have looks, but also to have character and personality and perform and have talent, that in some sense I'm like, well, if now also men having the same pressure on their looks, maybe in some sense levels the playing field on looks so that we're being able to focus more on what actually matters, which is the personality, now that looks for both women and men have the same standards. That was just one thought that popped in my head. I know realistically it's not really converting exactly like that, but maybe in the long run it would. Like, obviously there's different stages of Looksmaxxing. Going to the gym and caring for your health and caring how you dress, I think is a great principle. So I think it's obviously when people get down to the nitty gritty and are now taking hours from being a real human being to do it. But on the surface level, I don't really see it as a con at all. But that was my take.
I have a different take on Looksmaxxing, and it was interesting because as you were giving your answer, I realized that I had completely missed the boat of Looksmaxxing being this new thing because it's males doing it for the first time. Because I had thought of Looksmaxxing as just a movement for both men and women, even though Clavicular is a male and he's the face of it. And I sort of see this trend where both genders are becoming more similar to each other. Of course, you have guys who are Looksmaxxing, but you also have boss babes, girl bosses, girls who are making videos about how to make as much money as possible and be independent. So when I was looking at Looksmaxxing, what stood out to me was that the pursuit of beauty just for beauty in itself, not for necessarily attracting a mate, seems to me like it's trying to fulfill a greater purpose because people have lost meaning in their life. And if your goal is, I want to become more attractive, it gives you a purpose to go towards.
But was the purpose to attract women?
No, actually, Clavicular talks about that because I know he was.
Didn't he say something about what women are? Anyway, I'm sorry, you know better than I do.
No, continue with what you're saying.
I thought he was saying that he wasn't able to attract women when he was younger because of his looks, and that this was sort of a way to attract more attention. Am I wrong?
Okay, maybe I missed that, and
I might be wrong because you know more about him than I do.
Well, perhaps he started with that, but what stood out to me is that he was taking something to become stronger that actually messes with his fertility and his chances of being able to pass on his genes, which is traditionally what you're trying to attract a mate for. And of course, he does bring all of these women on his stream and things like that, but he has talked about it as just the pursuit of beauty for beauty in itself.
That just seems kind of empty to me after a while. I'm sorry, it's just me personally, and I can only react as a person. But we're more than that. We're more, it was the pressure on women for that, I felt kind of had a very negative effect on their psychology for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's no different with men. It's still kind of an empty sort of, now, I love glamorous women, and I can see like icons like Marilyn Monroe, etc. But she was actually an incredibly talented person who was actually a very brilliant actress and was very smart. And there was something kind of spiritual, I hate to say it, in her persona that it was so attractive. There's a kind of emptiness and one-dimensionality to this. So he's more like a performance artist than anything else, right? And that's his way of getting attention. And it's like, my body is like an art form. And I have a friend who's like that, who does that kind of thing. He's constantly working on his looks. He's getting plastic surgery, et cetera. He's older. But it just seems like, and for him, it's definitely performance art because he is an artist. But that's what this is. But it has to be part of an idea. If it's just about your looks, if it's just about the physicality of it, there's something very empty about that. Now, if there's something higher, if he's trying to prove a point, if he's trying to create this new kind of human being, if it's allied with a philosophy about, I'm like a Frankenstein, and I'm going to create some new kind of look that people, for the future, or I'm just playing with my body. If I could see some intelligence behind it, and maybe there is, because I I just read a few articles about him. Maybe he's more intelligent than I think.
Maybe the intelligence is like self-help, where do this, your life will be better. But at least from what I've seen from people doing Looksmaxxing trends on social websites, that's the main point of it.
What?
That your life will be better if you're more attractive.
Right.
And you're saying that there's much more to it than that. That's
Your
not
life
the only
will be
thing.
better in what way?
People will treat you better. You're more likely to get hired at a job, etc.
If you like punch yourself in the face and you create this like insane jawline and everything,
angular face, yeah.
you'll get more jobs and stuff. And there's data to go behind
Don't
it.
shoot the messenger. You're giving me a look. I'm just translating. I don't.
I mean, if you don't,
yeah.
if you just have a good looking face,
Yeah.
and you get hired, but you're stupid and you have no ideas and you're just empty, what good will it do in the long run? You're not going to advance very far. And how long can Clavicular, when he's in his 40s and 50s, keep doing this?
I mean, he's doing things that are not good for his health for the purpose of looking good now. I think that's one of the issues I have with Looksmaxxing. It's when people are actually doing dangerous things that might hurt their health, which is more important.
Well, that's sort of interesting to me. And maybe if that were aligned with the philosophy, like, I'm young, I don't care. I don't want to live until I'm 40, 50. I want to live hard right now. And I want to have, that's already, I can see like an idea there, because it's not just about, it's like I'm willing to take some risk. I'm being dangerous. I'm living hard and fast and young. The James Dean kind of thing. Yeah, all right, that intrigues me a little bit.
Okay, just to play devil's advocate, if I may, what about Looksmaxxing for women? Is that more important in terms of having a better life?
Well, I mean, I did a video about this. I think it's changing, and I think for women, men are always going to judge women on looks. Men and women I'm afraid we're biologically different, and our brains are wired differently. And I talked about in Seduction. I don't know. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I believe that these things are kind of slightly hardwired into us. And men traditionally are interested in looks. That's the first thing they're drawn to, right? Not necessarily a woman's brilliance or her chess mastery or whatever. They look at the looks. They look at the physicality. They can't help it, right? And it has to do with deep biological things going on. Women have a different set of values, right? They want a little bit more stability, and they're looking at a man's intelligence. They're looking at things that are not so obvious, his character, whether he's dependable, whether, he's got can bring me some stability, where he can have a good job, etc. So for women, it's kind of a trap, because, you can't change men's brains like that. But maybe there will be a shift going on in the next decades or so, where a man can be attracted to a woman for other qualities besides their looks. I know for me, they call them sapiosexual.
Yes.
Right. I know I had that weakness when I was very young, because I was in elementary school and I was always attracted to girls who wore glasses.
That's so
and that was
cute.
sort of like the opposite of what you're supposed to be.
Right.
I didn't know why until later on I figured out, because it's a sign that they were sort of smarter. They had read so many books that their eyes fell apart, kind of thing. So I can't remember what your original question was.
My original question was if Looksmaxxing is important for women.
I wouldn't say Looksmaxxing. I would say just being very attentive to your appearance, because men are, if what you want is attention from men, if you want a relationship, it is important. You can't disregard that. But in the art of seduction, I say it's not Looksmaxxing. It's not, you think it's about how big your breasts are, how big your butt is. But men also are not just so primitive that that's the only thing it can also be in how you dress and how you carry yourself. The female voice is incredibly seductive, right? And it has to do with a certain kind of pitch to it and a certain enunciation and way. So being attentive to your voice, to your gestures, to your body language, to how you dress, to how you present yourself, to how you smell. Men are very attentive to smell, just as women are, okay? So it's not just about looksmaxxing. It's about creating a seductive appearance, creating a fantasy about yourself. Cleopatra, evidently, because we don't have any photographs of her, obviously, was not the most attractive woman in the world. The little that we do have are from coins of her profile, and she had a bit of a nose. And in the reports in the literature of the time, they would talk that she was incredibly seductive, but no one ever would say that she was this incredibly beautiful woman. She just mastered, she was the first great seductress in history, probably. She mastered male psychology, and she knew how to create this theatrical presence that drove men crazy. And it's not just looksmaxxing. That's kind of the superficiality of our times, where like the art of seduction is about wearing a tight dress and kind of thing. It's not. It's more than that.
Since we went back to the art of seduction, one thing that I thought would be interesting to ask, and when I first heard this concept, it was in my favorite book. It's called The Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, and she talks about
I haven't read it, but I've heard of it.
You haven't read it?
No, but I've heard of it.
Okay. She talks about seducing yourself for your own creative pursuits. So specifically, let's say when you're not very motivated that day, and let's say you're a writer or you're creating music and you dress for yourself, or you put on a bit of perfume for yourself, so that the art of creativity is like similar to like you tapping in with a lover. And that way, that's kind of how you tap into the big magic. I don't think in the art of seduction, there's too much about seduction in yourself, or maybe there is. I don't know if you have any tips about like on a daily life, maybe more on a personal level that doesn't have to do with male-female relationships, tapping into that art of seduction. If that makes sense.
Well, yes. I mean, the Sublime is about that, like kind of letting the world seduce you. But I know I work at home. I don't have a job. I sit at my computer and I'm alone a lot. I know that I like to wear a decent, nice shirt and not just sit there. I never sit there in my shorts and try and write, because it doesn't feel right. Something doesn't feel professional, doesn't make me feel good. So, I'm not wearing a tie or a suit, but I like to feel like I have a certain image of myself. I talked in the book Mastery, because I have a chapter on creativity, about certain things that kind of get you in the mood for being creative. And one thing I had in there was like, I had examples of all of these writers and famous people who had like some very strange thing that they would smell or touch that would make them creative.
Interesting.
And it got me interested. And I think the brain and the body, we tend to divide them. We live so much in our heads in our culture nowadays. People are so left brain oriented that they don't realize that the body and the mind are one. There's no separation from that, right? The separation is only in our heads. We are animals. We still are attracted to smells, to scents, to looks, to sounds, to the sensual world, right? And so what I was talking about in Mastery was, so there's a famous German writer, Goethe, from the 19th century, late 18th century. He had it, no, actually it was his friend Schiller, who had a drawer full of rotten apples. I believe it was rotten apples. And the smell of it would make him so incredibly creative. He just was addicted to having these rotten apples in his drawer and the scent of it. And so when I wrote Mastery, I tried that on myself. I tried having a couple of rotten apples in my drawer, and I could see where it could trigger something like that.
Wow.
So yeah, you need to like seduce yourself, but through your senses, right? And that will make you more creative and not so totally in your head, and using your whole body and bringing your whole persona into the act of creation. Am I answering your question?
That was beautiful. I wanted you to just give us an explanation. Okay. That was great. I think it's a good time for you to maybe help define Sublime, so we can go into, since it's very much about being in the present.
There's several ways to discuss it. I mean, the metaphor that I've said in many podcasts, so I have to repeat myself
That's
here.
That's okay.
It's all right. Is we live within certain conventions in our lives, but we're not aware of it. So if you think, for example, of people in the 17th century, and Louis XIV, they're wearing powdered wigs, They wear these clothes. He would wear high heels. They dressed differently. They spoke differently. Everything was formal. We could see through the lens of 300 years ago how conventional their world was and how weird it was. It's so different. We can't see that in our own present time. We can't realize that we're as conventional as Louis XIV in his time. It's just different conventions. We look differently, but it's still everybody. We're an animal that's constantly imitating other people. We're part of a zeitgeist. We're part of a cultural moment that we can't get out of. And in any kind of culture, any kind of moment, there's a level of restriction. This is how you're supposed to behave. Now it's all social media. This is how you're supposed to present yourself. This is how you're supposed to think. And it creates patterns. And we all follow these patterns and we're not conscious of it. But it starts to feel constricted. It starts to feel like, is this all there is to my life? And you don't realize it, but you're feeling bored. You're feeling restless. You're feeling like there's got to be something else. We live in a universe of limitless dimensions, and we're discovering all these weird things about the universe. Our minds, our consciousness have immense powers that other animals have other powers, but they don't have it. It's insane to think about these things, but to live in these small little rabbit holes on the internet or on social media, to me is really, really depressing. And I feel like a lot of people are literally going insane right now because of the restriction, the limited nature of their consciousness. And so the sublime, that limited nature is a circle. That circle can be a little bit larger or it can be small, but it's always a limit factor. The sublime is anything outside of that limit. Things that you don't normally think about, patterns of behavior that you normally wouldn't do, emotions that you don't normally feel. When you go outside that circle, it creates this the sublime is a physical sensation before it's a mental sensation. You have a chill, you have goosebumps, your heart beats faster, your eyes dilate, you almost feel like you want to cry. Something kind of beautiful that's happening, but you don't have the words for it. It creates this physical sensation, and then your mind starts opening up. It's an opening up process to the vastness, to the actual powers of human consciousness and how limitless it is and how absolutely beautiful the world can be. Now, I had meant to write the book 20 years ago, but I got detoured by a book I did with 50 Cent, and then Mastery, and then Human Nature. And then 8 years ago, I had a stroke, and I came this close to dying. I was driving my car. My wife was with me, and if she hadn't called 911 and they hadn't come right away, I'd either be dead right now or I'd have severe brain damage, which for me would be as good as being dead, right? And so suddenly, the world looks a lot different now to me. Just the fact that I'm alive. Now, I slip back, I forget that, but I keep returning to it constantly. But you're going to die. Everybody's going to die. No one gets out of here alive, as Jim Morrison said. Okay? So we're all facing the same thing. And that moment of death wakens you up to like, whoa, I haven't been seeing these things. I haven't been seeing the world through this lens. So that's what this book is about.
One thing that really stood out to me as I was looking at your works, both everything you've done in the past and as you're going into Sublime, is that it almost maps onto Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, you start with security and safety and laws of power kinds of applies to that. Then you have love and belonging. So you have seduction, and then you have esteem and self-actualization, which is the 50th law, and mastery. And then Laszlo actually ended up adding another level, which was transcendence, which is connecting to something bigger to yourself, which to me really connects to the idea of sublime. One thing I was thinking about as we were going into this podcast is so many people get stuck in some of the lower levels. And while it's not linear, you could be working on multiple things at the same time. If you don't have job security or you're unable to eat, that's going to take up more of your mind space. How do you connect this for the normal person who's living their day-to-day life and explain why it's important to get in touch with sublime?
That's a great question. Well, the title of the book is The Law of the Sublime. And what is the law? I talk about a lot in this book about our early ancestors, right? And because I'm obsessed with that. And if you think about it, before we even invented language, humans became conscious as we know it now, maybe 30, 40, 50,000 years ago. It's not like a moment. Of course, it was like an evolution. But at a certain point, we start becoming conscious. And animals have their own consciousness, but an animal doesn't look up at the sky and go, wow, look at that. What's going on? The stars, how amazing. As far as I know, because that's not completely true. We do know chimpanzees have a degree of awe, but it's not the same thing as a human. So these ancestors, they're looking around, they look at the sky, whoa. They're looking at all the things around in the world. They're looking at these enormous animals that are prowling about. They're going, who created this? How did this happen? They see plants constantly coming out of the ground. Things that we take for granted, consciousness erupts, right? And so they're so insanely inspired by that they create all of these rituals. They create art. They create cave paintings. They create dances. They create rituals. And yet they lived in a world where survival was incredibly harsh, a lot harsher than anything we've ever had to deal with. But the need to feel that there's something more than just eating and killing animals and sitting around a fire is deeply embedded in human nature because of the nature of our consciousness, which is limitless. So to only be concerned with your daily sustenance is important. But look, for me, when I first wanted to write the book, I was going to have all of these adventures. I was going to go to the Amazon. I was going to go swim with dolphins. I was going to do all this, and I was going to have Sublime and write about it. And when it came time to writing the book, I could barely walk out the front door. I was trapped in my office. And I had to decide that the Sublime is in everything around me, just looking out the window, just looking at my cats in the house, right? Just looking at the world as it is was insane. You don't need money to do that. You could be flipping burgers at McDonald's and you can still look at people's faces and go, how strange it is. How strange it is I'm working at this job. How weird it is to be alive. You can still walk outside. The sky is still above you. You can still suddenly become, people don't realize, and I explain in the first chapter of the book, how odd it is to even have a sun, a star, where it's exactly at the right distance so that life could evolve. You don't have to have money. You don't have to have security to be able to appreciate all of those things. In fact, opening yourself up to that may make it easier to live your life, to make more money, to be more creative, to be more open to things, right?
Why?
Why?
Yeah, why would it make your life easier in that way? I actually have my own answer to this, but I'm curious what yours is.
Well, your answer is probably more interesting than mine, but
I doubt that, but I'd love to hear it.
We're physical creatures. We have consciousness and a mind, but we also have a body. And we're living so closed and constricted that when you open yourself up to these things, and so each of the chapters is a different aspect of it. The one was love. There's another one having to do with animals, what I call the interspecies sublime and how we connect to animal consciousness. Another one's about the brain. Another one's about our childhood, on and on and on. When you connect to these different kind of facets, it kind of opens you up mentally, physically. It makes your mind spin and it makes you more creative, right? And that could have a reverberating effect on your work, on your life. But if you see yourself as only this kind of creature that needs to have a job, that needs to get this amount of money, then that mind of yours just kind of closes into that's who you are, but you're greater than that. And for thousands of years, we've been religious people. We had religious beliefs, right? That were very powerful, that anchored us. Now they're gone for whatever reason. But the poorest people on the planet were the ones who were the most religious of all. Why? Because they needed it. And that doesn't change. So hierarchy of needs this is a need of yours. And if you deny it, what you're going to have is you're going to have symptoms. You're going to have loneliness. You're going to have boredom. You're going to feel lonely. You're going to feel like you have no purpose in life, etc. And even if you're poor, this is going to affect you. You're going to have these symptoms. So this is a need of yours. It used to be supplied by religion. And if you go to a country like Mexico or third world countries where people are dirt poor, they're often the most spiritual of all.
Mm-hmm.
The slaves in America. I did a story about Harriet Tubman, a slave and hers. They were incredibly religious, incredibly spiritual. Why? It wasn't putting food on their table, but they needed it. It was part of the law that I'm talking about. So you had another interpretation.
No, I
a
think,
better one.
I think that's really beautiful, and I love that a lot. For me, it's very much in my own personal life. I see the sublime as a way to strangle my own ego and remind myself that there's more out there.
Yeah.
Because when I get too much in the ego, it's like, who am I? What is the story I'm telling myself? What do I want? Those things seem so important that they give me anxiety. But then you can do activities like go in nature and get that feeling of something breathtaking, and or think about space.
You're expressing it beautifully. I mean, I should have said that, but that's even better than what I was saying. That's very much true. That's very much
very nice of you. I really liked the way you said it.
No, but I'm not being insincere. It's very true. And that is a lot of what the book is about, is you're trapped inside yourself and trapped inside your ego. And the need to transcend yourself and feel that you're part of something larger is part of this need that I'm talking about.
Yeah. And just as a little related to what I said before, but this is what I found interesting about what you're working on now, because what you worked on before is very much answering the questions of the ego. Like, I want to seduce people. I want to be powerful. I want to do these things. And now you're finally doing things that take it down. And for me, what I find fascinating is you mentioned how the ego can be both a strength and a weakness. So it feels like it's completing that, because you have to both have an ego to live in this world, but you also have to take it down to not let it take control of you.
Well, you make another good point. So, we're social animals, and we do have to make a living, and we do have to live with other people. So if you only were living with the sublime, you would probably die of starvation at some point, right? And the social world can be very difficult. People are very tricky. A lot of people can be very manipulative, okay? So the 48 Laws of Power wasn't written for you to go out and screw people. I mean, some people have used it for that, and I don't endorse that at all. Mostly, it's a manual about how to protect yourself from the assholes who are all around you. And you need a degree of security in your life. It's not security that comes necessarily from money, although it's important. It's a degree of security that comes from, I can control my social life. To some degree, I can influence my children, my spouse, my colleagues, my boss. I'm not helpless in this world. If you feel completely helpless, I think it is very hard to connect to the sublime. So, yes, I've evolved, but I'm still the person who wrote the 48 Laws of Power. It's still me. It's still very much, I'm not denying it at all. It's a very important book because people suffer so much from social activity, from people who blindside them with power games and all kinds of nasty things. And nobody tells us how to deal with that in this world. No teacher, no parent, nobody says, people are going to screw you when you get out of college. Here's how you have to protect yourself. I mean, some parents might, but very few. No teachers do. They don't teach it in the university. So you can't open yourself up to the world if people are constantly attacking you and you have no power, you have no control. So there is a slight connection between the two books.
Okay, I have one question that I really want to ask about the ego, because it's somewhat connected. It's related to the question of, does absolute power corrupt absolutely? And my curiosity was, is there any example of somebody who had power who was also able to strangle their ego or maintain a good relationship with the sublime?
Yeah, I mean, you pick out an example and people will go, well, that's so rare. I mean, how many other people out there are like that? But I make the quote, I believe in power, that, the cliche is absolute power corrupts absolutely. Then there's a quote from Malcolm X, it's actually in Seduction, that the lack of power, powerlessness, is what corrupts even more. So when people feel like they have no control over their lives, they become passive aggressive. They play all kinds of weird negative games on people because it's human nature. We can't deal with life unless we have some degree of control. So we're going to try to get it in some way, and we're going to play negative games. So, you take somebody like an icon of power would be Abraham Lincoln,
Mm-hmm.
right? Probably, to me, our greatest president. And he was somebody who had an incredible feel for the power game. But he could play hardball. He could do things that were definitely a little bit not underhanded, but he understood how the game was played, right? And he became president in perhaps the most, and he was a weird person, Abraham Lincoln. He was very poetic. He had almost Edgar Allan. He was very manic depressive. He would go through these deep bouts of depression. And he was somebody who I think was very sensitive to things like the Sublime, and he'd make quotes about things about that. But at the same time, he had to deal with the greatest crisis that we ever had in American history. He was a brilliant, brilliant strategist. That's the thing. I was thinking about today, masculinity is all about, being tough and Pete Hegseth, and we're going to obliterate them, we're going to kill them. Actually, real masculinity, if you want it, is being strategic, is thinking ahead, is playing chess. Not to say that you're being masculine when you play chess, because you can play, so disregard that part. But it's the ability to think ahead is traditionally a very masculine virtue,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so Abraham Lincoln, he was one of these people who had a kind of a softness, a vulnerable side to him, but he was a brilliant strategist. And he saw further ahead than anyone else that you could win the Civil War, but you could create such bitterness in the South that you would never be able to recover. So you have to win this war in a way where you can bring them back into the Union. That was his one goal, and he stayed true to it, and he ended up becoming our greatest president. Someone like that can be very, very powerful, very strategic, very brilliant, but also have a soul.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you're asking me is, can you still have a soul and be powerful? You can lose it for sure, and many more examples of people losing it. But there are examples of people who have retained their soul while being strategic and being good at the power game.
What do you think separates the people who can keep it versus the ones who can't?
I don't have all the answers. There could be a genetic component for all we know.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I would have to say it's the strength of your ego. So in the Laws of Human Nature, I have a chapter on narcissism, right? And I think narcissism is something that's slightly misunderstood. We all are self-absorbed, every single one of us. We all are narcissists. I'm a narcissist. Both of you are narcissists, okay? But to the degree that you can love yourself strongly enough and feel secure about yourself, you can then love other people. You can be empathetic towards them because you're not always worried what other people are thinking about you. You're not so insecure. You're not always worried about, are you pleasing people? Are you saying the right things? You feel secure. If you feel secure, then you can go out and feel love and feel empathy and help other people. It's the types who in their early childhood never felt secure, never had that kind of self-esteem. Their ego wasn't about to develop in a strong manner. They either had a parent who was too suffocating or a parent who abandoned them or was abusive. And so as they get older, the only way they could get that love and attention is by acting out and being all very dramatic and doing kind of negative and playing all of these games. And we can see that, I hate to say it, I don't want to bring politics in that, in our president right now, who's a raging narcissist. I call it a deep narcissist. And they can't raise themselves up high enough to think about other people, to think about what other people need and not what they need. So to answer your question, the types that have that kind of strong anchor, who don't feel so weak and jiggly inside, can raise up to that level. Now, an interesting example would be Winston Churchill, who had a very abusive childhood, okay? And it's a very common trait for powerful people to have something very much lacking in their childhood, and power becomes a way of kind of compensating for that. And he was very weak, and he had a lot of problems, and he was constantly depressed. He called them his black periods or his blue periods. He go deeply into depression. And then World War II comes out, and suddenly he transforms himself, and all those negative qualities change, And he becomes this great leader who's able to lead England in its worst moment. What was the switch there? I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I think he had a soul. He had a sensitivity. He wasn't just all about power. He was somebody who painted, who was interested in poetry.
As a kid, I always had a conflicting relationship with religion. And this year, I'd say it's the closest I've ever been to my faith. And not saying that you have to be religious to practice gratitude. Many people can just be spiritual and meditate. But for me, very much like what brought me closer to God was just the practice of having more gratitude in my life and thanking these moments. And I was just curious to ask you, are you a religious person? And what is your relationship with God?
I'm born Jewish, and I went to Hebrew school, and I was bar mitzvahed, and I learned Hebrew and everything. But I never connected to the religion. It just seemed so empty to me. It just seemed like a bunch of formulas that you would go and recite. And here I was growing up in California and hippies and all these weird things going on. It just had no connection to my daily life. But I've also, I think, someone who very much has spiritual needs. And so I found it when I was growing up in other things. I took drugs, I have to admit. I went through a very heavy drug phase, but not drugs to just kill myself, but drugs to open my mind. LSD, mushrooms, peyote, the whole gamut, right? And that kind of fed my spiritual needs, opened myself up to something greater than just day-to-day life. And so I I find my way, like I think most people do, to things that attract them. You found it to religion, probably of your ancestors, your parents, et cetera, right?
And my partner actually, we started praying together, and that's why I was like, oh, it's actually just practicing gratitude is very similar to praying.
So it's not Catholicism or anything like that?
We grew up I say we grew up pretty religious in Greek Orthodox church.
Greek Orthodox, yeah.
But I always felt very separate until religion, God was presented to me as just the habit of like being in the moment and being thankful for every day.
Yeah, yeah. So I've always been drawn to the ancient world and the ancient relationship to God and to nature. So I always found it in nature itself and animals and just the world at large. And then I've always, since college, I've been obsessed with Zen Buddhism for various reasons. It has a deep attraction to how my mind works. I don't want to go into that why, but that's the nature of it. And I've always been reading about it. Then 16 years ago, I've religiously, every day, I meditate for 40 minutes in the morning. And I practice that very seriously. And so that's sort of how I feed that thing. And but you can find it in many different ways. Organized religion, I don't necessarily poo-poo it or look down on it, but it can feel kind of dead sometimes, where it's not about you and your relationship to the universe, your relationship to God. It's not about a personal experience. It's about some authority telling you that this is what you must say, what you must repeat, what you must believe. It doesn't feel personal and intimate anymore, a lot of organized religion to me. Now, there are charismatic forms of Christianity that are different. I understand that. And there are forms of Islam that are different. But to me, organized religion, there was always an element of, it doesn't have a personal connection. And I need everything to feel kind of personal to me. Like it's my experience. It's not someone telling me what I'm experiencing. It's me experiencing it myself.
And I'm curious, just as someone who tries to be more disciplined with their own meditation, but obviously falling in and out of it, there's many forms of meditation. Sometimes when I'm starting, it's just setting a timer for 10 minutes and be silent. Some of my friends have mantra meditation where they have one mantra that they use for years, and they do a training for that. What is your type of meditation? Like, how do you start your process? Is there anything you can share?
Well, you don't want to reveal too much about it because it's kind of personal, but it's all right. It's
I'll only share what
more. It's more about emptying your mind. So the idea is that there's a concept in Buddhism and Zen of enlightenment, kensho or whatever in Japanese. And so what is enlightenment? Enlightenment is this feeling, this opening up to what the world is really like. And, I can't describe it because it doesn't exist in words. That's the whole point of Zen Buddhism. You have to get outside of language. But we don't realize that we live in a constructed reality. I hate to sound like I'm something from the Matrix, but the Matrix.
Love that.
Yeah, we're very into this.
But the Matrix is actually quite right. We live in a constructed world, an artificial world. It's simulated. It's a world that people have fed us and programming us. And it's a world that has to just do with things that are human, with language, with symbols, abstractions. And so this meditation is a way to get you outside of the realm of words and to experience life directly and immediately as it is, right? So a lot of it is, in the beginning, in your first years, you're trying to quiet the mind so you're not always bubbling with a million different thoughts. And still to this day, I still have that problem, right? But it's quieting that down, creating kind of a silence in the brain. And you have no idea how beautiful that can, well, maybe you do. If you can quiet your mind, if you can shut up all that chatter. Yesterday, my physicality, as you can see, is limited. But years ago, I bought a recumbent bike just after my stroke because I'm an exercise freak. I live in Griffith Park and the hills are pretty intense up there, right? And so I take this recumbent bike and it's much harder to ride than a normal bike because you're lying down and you have no power. And I go up these hills where there are no cars, there are no people. And I was in the middle of it and I love it because it's so beautiful and it's quiet. And I go, all right, I'm turning off my mind. I'm no more thinking. And I'm just going to hear the sounds around me, right? And the bird songs and the traffic and the helicopters. It was like bliss. And I was only able to be in it for like 10 minutes. But just getting outside and shutting all that inner chatter is blissful. And so a lot of the meditation is just that. And there's a name for that particular branch of Zen Buddhism called Shikantaza, which is just 40 minutes of no thinking. You have no idea how difficult that is.
It is really difficult.
Yeah.
As someone who's tried.
Yeah.
I struggle with 10 minutes. And that's also the reason I bought a bunch of bikes. I wanted to tell Alex. I bought a bunch of bikes so I could go to the nature, but we just go on our walks because unfortunately it's kind of hard to bike out of our spot in LA. But I didn't mean to cut you off.
Where do you live?
Like in the middle of a busy city where if you bike, there's no bike lanes.
Do you have a car where you can load your bikes on?
The Tesla doesn't have a bike rack, but now our friend has one. And I bought a tandem bike from my sister and I, and bikes years ago.
You have a tandem bike?
It got stolen.
Someone stole it, but I accidentally bought like 2-3 bikes. So that's actually been my fantasy for so many years since we lived in LA, to go bike peaceful and to just, I like walks, but something about biking just felt more in the moment. So maybe I can convince her.
Hiking is better in some ways. I wish I could hike.
Yeah,
but biking has its other thrills too. Yeah, and you don't have to go to Griffith Park. You can put your Tesla and go to Santa Barbara, go to Ojai. Yeah. I love biking in Ojai. I could give you some routes. I've been biking all over this area for years.
Yeah, actually, we'll get those from you after.
Okay.
And my second question that I was curious, because I liked how you described the Sublime as something that has to happen within you and it can't be passive happening to you.
Yes, very true.
And you had a critique specifically, sorry, I struggle sometimes with English. You had a criticism specifically of the Marvel movies. And you were saying going to the movie.
You read that somewhere? You heard that?
You're in one of your podcasts.
Okay.
Well, maybe you can.
No.
So it was practically like going to the movies, and maybe obviously another example is video games. People get a false sense of Sublime. Yeah. But I was curious, and specifically also when you were saying, art evolved as a religious thing where art initially was spiritual and a way to communicate with the gods.
Yeah.
Do you think that still applies to all art nowadays? For example, we watched Project Hail Mary, and I felt after like really in a moment of Sublime, it started my interest in the universe and wanting to go into space. And music is another example. So I was curious how you would say that fake Sublime, does it really not apply to these forms of art in modern day?
I call it false Sublime. You bring up something interesting because to me, those Marvel-like movies, I didn't see Project Hail Mary, which I hear is very interesting. Those Marvel movies don't affect me. They feel like I'm being played, like they're manipulating me, like they know all the little things and the sounds and the images that's going to make me have a reaction, right? And I like to be in control. So the sublime has to come from within. It can't be external stimulation. That external stimulation could be video games, it could be porn, it could be, any kind of addiction. It can be taking drugs, it could be alcohol. You need, I call it false sublime because it is sublime. You want to be taken outside yourself, but you're looking for it from outside sources. But it has to come from within. It can't be passive. Your imagination has to be triggered, has to become active. So you bring up an interesting point because this movie, which may not have the same effect on me, it might, triggered your imagination. It made you think about things. So in that sense, it wouldn't be the false sublime. The movie still might have had elements of manipulation and the Hollywood gimmickry, but on you it had this effect, so I wouldn't call it the false sublime. It all depends on what it does to you inside. Does it alter your consciousness? Does it make you think about things? Does it open you up to different experiences? That's what separates the false from the real sublime. It has to come from within. Is that your question?
Yeah, that's what I was curious, because for me, I get in that state a lot more like through music.
You asked about art and music. Yeah, definitely music. Music is the most sublime of all the art forms. As I say, the sublime is a physical thing first and foremost. And music has the most physical effect upon us of all the art forms, right? There's something we can't control. And going back thousands of years, it's been speculated, and I believe very firmly, that human language evolved out of music, it evolved out of singing, right? Out of chanting. And, and like how birds sing. Okay. And so singing is part of nature. It's not just humans. And so music is the most sublime of all because it affects us physically. And then it can make us think, but it has that powerful, powerful effect. In the ancient world, or sometimes even now, there's kind of the primitive type of music with a certain drum beat that's like trance-like, that's meditative, that just affects our blood. Then there's other kinds of music that are more sort of spiritual and affect the mind more deeply, but are still very physical. And I use them. I have a chapter on art, the aesthetic sublime, and I talk about movies and musicals and drama. And I have a story of a Russian composer who's one of my favorite, perhaps my favorite composer, and he created the most sublime music of all, because he was very mystical and he wanted to kind of create music that was like the music of the universe, music of the cosmos. He was also nuts. Okay. He was completely insane, but his music is so weird and it's so weirdly spiritual and it's so different, but his isn't that kind of primitive sound. It's more kind of just strange. It's like, and so, I have a chapter on animals and the interspecies sublime, and I don't know why I'm breaking this up, but so spiders have a very different, much different brain.
Spiders. I love spiders, so
I really wanted to get a tarantula, and part of my fascination is there's such an alien mind. I want to understand them.
Please do.
She loves the spiders, so really please go on.
I remember I was in elementary school. We had a girl named, I can still remember her name, Pearl, and we went to the Los Angeles Zoo, and this woman took out a tarantula, and everyone was going, ah! And this girl, Pearl, because girls can be a lot braver than boys sometimes. She put the tarantula in her hand. And the woman taught her that if you have your hand out like that, the tarantula can't bite. Nobody wanted to do it, but this woman did. This girl did. And I've never forgotten it. I still remember her name.
That's adorable. Wow.
That's really
anyway,
sweet.
Spiders live in a world of sound, right? They're almost blind, right? And I don't really know if they have a sense of smell. I don't think so. It's all vibrations.
I didn't know that.
And so on their spider web, they can feel everything going on. They can pound it. They can play it like drums to create. And so these scientists created music for spiders that would appeal to spiders because they could hear the recordings that spiders would emit, because spiders create a kind of a music. And I thought, whoa, what an interesting idea, spider music.
Yeah.
And they've done that for monkeys, and they've done that for birds, where they create music where the animals react in a certain way. So there's something about music that's different from anything
that has
else.
to be evidence of the animals having their own consciousness. Like that's the most human thing, like that example that you could give for such a small bug like a spider.
Yeah.
Robert, thank you for being here. We have a few final rapid fire
Okay,
questions for
okay.
you.
I usually don't do so well at these, but I'll try my hardest.
Who had more power, Julius Caesar or Napoleon?
Wow, that's a good question. They're both very comparable, and Napoleon was very interested in Caesar. In some ways, I would say Julius Caesar. Napoleon was the more brilliant war strategist, but Caesar had a sense of something larger than that. And he was also a brilliant strategist. And who knows what would have happened if he hadn't been assassinated. I just personally find him very interesting because he was somewhat of an artist when it came to power. And he was very sensitive. He was very much into theater. And he always thought of his gestures as being very theatrical. And he always played to an audience. So in some ways, he's very kind of contemporary. He would have been brilliant on the internet, right?
Yeah.
He was always thinking about how his hair looked, and the way his toga was, and the colors that he wore. And his words were always like something out of a theater, out of a piece of drama, you know? The die is cast. Yalea, I'm not going to go into the Latin, but alea jactus est. Sorry. It's because I studied Latin and I felt embarrassed that I couldn't remember this. So he was very theatrical, and he had a sense of humor, and he was just a very interesting human being. I don't know if he was more powerful, but Napoleon was somebody who had a weak spot, and he kind of lost control. The last 10 years of his life were very tragic, very difficult. Caesar never had that kind of downfall. He just simply was assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was seduced by Cleopatra, but I'm just more attracted to Caesar in that sense.
That's fair.
But it's a great question.
Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great?
Oh, Caesar or Alexander the Great? Well, you know, in one sense, Alexander the Great conquered like what was considered the entire world at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And his boldness was incredible, and his courage was incredible. Caesar was also very courageous. But there's something I would say more powerful about Alexander the Great. And he too died at a very early age, so we don't know what would have happened to him. But if you want to talk about impact on the world stage, Alexander the Great had an incredible impact. He influenced Egypt. You know, his line was what Cleopatra was descended from.
Right.
But the whole idea of creating this unified empire, I mean, there were obviously there's a Persian empire, et cetera, but like all of the empires, you know, into one. And his boldness and his creativity and some of the greatest battles that he fought against incredible odds.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm also very much attracted to the myth of Alexander the Great. The further you go back in time, the more misty it becomes and the more interesting it becomes, at least for someone like me.
So who would be your pick?
Alexander.
And last one on this.
Alexandra.
Yes. Alexander the Great or Elon Musk?
Oh, God. Obviously, Alexander the Great. You know, I don't deny his level. He's a marketing genius. And he's also, you know, a tech genius. But I'm talking about Elon Musk, not Alexander the Great. He's obviously, you know, very brilliant. But it's of a different level. And it's a little bit soulless. And the people like Caesar and Alexander don't strike me that way, right? I mean, do you know who Alexander the Great's tutor was? I'm sure you do.
Oh, wait, I do. Was it? It was one of the ancient Greek philosophers.
Aristotle.
Aristotle, right.
So his tutor was Aristotle. Now, I don't think Elon Musk quite had a tutor. He went to Stanford, I believe.
Penn. I think he dropped out like the first day at Stanford.
Oh,
PhD.
okay. So he didn't have an Aristotle. So already there, he's got that mark against him. But Alexander the Great was obsessed with literature, poetry, his place in history. He had a soul, a huge, immense, he was sublime in so many ways. He wasn't perfect. He had some definite moral deficiencies, but he's much more sublime than Elon Musk. So I would definitely vote for Alexander the Great.
Okay, fair. Who alive today do you think is shaping the world the most?
It's hard to say. I think, unfortunately, Donald Trump would be on there in a negative way. I don't mean to bring politics in this, but he's not my cup of tea. AI is shaping the world today. Is going to like revolutionize this world. A lot of it possibly very negative. Some of it good, I don't deny. But the people who are developing AI are the true lords of our future. Whether you want to call it Sam Altman, whether you want to call it Dario Amodei of Anthropic, or any of the others, there are probably people in China who are even more brilliant at it because the Chinese are much more clever than we are. They know, the Chinese have a knowledge of economy and scale that goes back to people like Sun Tzu and strategy, where you just can't waste money and waste manpower. You have to economize. You have to make things lean and that. And because they're a dictatorship, they can do that. But they're creating AI on a much easier scale where you don't need these immense data centers, right? And all this energy. They're more clever about it. But these are the lords of our future. And they're the ones that are going to be determining so much of how we think. Young people are now being suckled on AI. It's altering their thought patterns. It's altering the future of humanity. These people have powers that nobody in the past ever had, right? And they're definitely the lords of our future, for better or for worse.
I didn't get to ask you which
strong
seducer type you think we fell into.
Oh,
We
yeah.
took a quiz.
I would say Andrea's kind of the natural.
Is that the one I got? I'm trying to remember.
You got the ideal.
I am.
Well, I don't know you well enough.
It was just a 5-minute internet quiz.
Oh,
It was.
So you might know better.
I think I would.
The first answer I got was the crab. And then I
The
realized,
crab, there is no crab.
I know.
She
She
did the
sent me a
wrong
link
test.
and I said, I don't think this is Robert's type.
No, she clicked a different link.
That's astrology.
I don't know. It started with a link on your test, but it took me to the crab.
Okay. Yeah, I would say you're the natural. You're certainly not the coquette. And you're not.
Certainly not.
You could be the charmer, but yeah, I would say you're the natural.
What are the traits of the natural?
It's kind of a slight innocence. It's like the child is still alive.
Mm-hmm.
There's something still childlike about you that kind of is very appealing.
Like Aubrey Hepburn.
Yeah.
I'll take it. And
Yeah,
my
very much
sister,
so.
what would you guess her?
My first answer, which might be the wrong one, was you might be the dandy.
Remind me the dandy?
Okay. That's the one who kind of mixed which gender they look like.
Oh,
Not
well,
look
'cause
like.
she has
Or
masculine
energy, maybe
traits.
energy.
No,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of. Alex does have masculine
Well, it's not.
that are.
It's not like you're
great.
transgender or anything.
Of course.
It's
Which
like
is fine.
Marlene Dietrich in the 30s. Men were going wild over her, and she did a famous scene in a movie where she dressed in a tuxedo, and it was so transgressive. People were going crazy over her.
Wow.
But it's a woman or a man has a touch of the feminine to him, and the woman has a touch of the masculine. And it's not like they're gay, although they can be. It's just that it's very, very appealing to men and women to sense that it's more like you're 80% female and 20% masculine, or 80% masculine and 20% female. And that touch of the feminine or the masculine makes you very intriguing, and it can be very, very sexually attractive to people.
That was a pretty good read.
Yeah, that's really
That
interesting.
was quite well done. It's almost like you wrote a book about it. Almost like you're an expert on this.
Yeah.
Much better than the crab.
It's funny because on the quiz, we both got the same answer.
You got a crab too?
Yeah. No, I think we both got the ideal.
Yeah.
The ideal lover.
But it was honestly a 5-minute internet quiz that wasn't deep enough.
Yeah.
The ideal lover is somebody who just is extremely romantic and knows how to create fantasies for other people.
Isn't it also somebody who mirrors and is very empathetic?
Yes, that's definitely an element, although all of these types have that kind of psychology. The charmer has that as well.
Yeah.
They're butchering your quiz.
They did butcher it.
Yeah. No, the ideal lover he's appealing to your ideal.
Mm-hmm.
So the word is literally there. You know, he senses, or she, the ideal that you want in the other person, and you become that person for them.
Mm.
So it has a little bit of where you're somebody who's almost an actor. You can shift your appearance to the person. You become the ideal of the person that you're dealing with.
That makes sense. I think it chose that because a lot of the questions were about what do you want, and I think we both probably clicked emotional connection on everything. So it probably took emotions to be the ideal lover.
Sounds like a pretty lame quiz.
Sounds like we need to find a better quiz. Robert, thank you so much for chatting with us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Alexandra and Andrea.
Thanks for coming on.
I still remembered you at the end.
You did amazing. Thank you so much.